Hi there, welcome back to Sapiens Forward. In this video, I want to cover some of the basic terms that you should probably become familiar with and understand, at least at a high level, of what they mean when you're going to be trying to use some of these newer AI chat tools. Now, some of us are coming from a more technical background, and so we may more readily understand what some of these terms are and how these tools work and what some of the underlying technologies are. But other folks out there, maybe you don't have a technical background, but there's no reason we shouldn't all try to be able to operate at a level where we can at least understand at a high level what's going on with these tools, what AI is trying to do, and how you're interacting with them helps the tool provide something valuable to you. So let's go ahead and take a look and dive right in. So what is a large language model? So this is one of the terms that is used so much out there when people are talking about in the media or online in social media about these AI chat tools. It's large language model, or LLM. And essentially these AI tools are built at their core is a model that is a extrapolation of connections between words and phrases and concepts in human language. And these models are trained by essentially reviewing and interpolating and understanding extensive amounts of human content, human-generated content, media. So we're talking about books, practically the entirety of the internet, videos, PDFs, and emails or Word docs, just all manner of types of media, content, materials that are built from human language and conversation and allow these systems, as they're being trained to understand the contextual relationships between these different words, and that formulate the sentences and phrases and ultimately concepts, what those connections are. And so the idea of what is a large language model, well, by its very definition, it's because it are using these extensively created and combined sets of language to form what is ultimately a large language model. Tokens is another term that is used a lot when talking about how you're interacting with some of these chat tools. In its most basic sense, a token is a word, almost, or maybe a part of a word, or maybe even characters. Now, I don't want to get into super deep specifics on how these language models ultimately work at a technical level. I want to keep this fairly high level, but the tokens are how it is stringing together responses. And you may have seen this in the media or people referring to it in how these chat tools, the AI is actually doing what it's doing, where you present it with a question or a task and it creates something from seemingly nothing. It's ultimately trying to predict what is the next token, what is the next word that would make sense in the response that it's giving you. So when you see this reference to tokens, that's basically what it's referring to. Words or characters or maybe even letters. But sometimes that could be, tokens that relate to programming languages when it's actually doing coding and stuff like that. When it comes to generating images, tokens or aspects of that could be, predict what is the next pixel in the image that needs to be generated. Now, inference is kind of that process where how I just described, where the AI model is producing this output. Well, the beginning part of that is you provide it input, and that input might be a question like, what is the current month of this year, or something. That's a pretty basic question. I mean, even like something like Siri from Apple iOS could answer that without using AI. But the idea is like you're providing it input in form of a question or phrase or something like that. It's produced out of tokens. The AI system takes that, and using the model that it's trained on for using, it infers or tries to determine like what is the appropriate response. What it tries to predict what would be the most appropriate string of tokens assembled together, or words, to answer that question successfully. So that's inference. And the context window is essentially the limit of the amount of input and info, tokens, or memory that these AI tools can work with during a conversation or a task. So, I mean, you could ask it something really simple like, what is going to be the next month this year based on the current date? And it might be a very small context window because that question is rather small, the amount of tokens going into it, or, just practically single digits almost. And the answer is probably going to be just a few tokens, if anything, right? Now, if you ask it, what is the nature of the universe and how do humans fit into it from a philosophical modality that best fits with humanism? I'm just kind of making up a concept there to explore, but you can imagine that even a person would probably struggle to come up with a really great answer to that. That didn't take many minutes, maybe hours or days perhaps. An AI system is going to have a limited amount of room in which it can operate with each particular task or question. So as you can see here, depending on the model, the AI model that you're working with, that context window is going to be different sizes. And even within the same product type, like let's say ChatGPT versus Claude or Gemini, which are all chat AI tools out there that you can utilize, they might have premium versions which are going to provide you more memory and context window to work with based on if you're using like a premium version. Now, compute power is a different way to look at the type of capabilities that these chat AI tools can do to process what your questions are. We talk about to take in your input that's compiled of different amount of tokens, words, or whatnot, and they're going to be processed during that context window, trying to figure out what is and infer what the ultimate answer is that's going to be most appropriate to what you're asking for. The compute power is only the technical side on the back end. We're talking about servers, wherever those servers might be. That could be on your own local computer if you're running one of these large language models on your own computer, which is possible to do. We'll talk about that in another video. Or if you are using one of these big, commercial chat AI chat tools like ChatGPT or Claude, those are running in the cloud. The compute power is the amount of computer power ultimately that those tools are able to draw from in order to process this question that you have, to try and infer programmatically what it is the best response will be. And the more complex the question, potentially more computer power is going to be needed to get the best possible answer. And some of these, newer premium versions of these tools, so just recently announced the ChatGPT Pro, those have been set up by OpenAI in that particular example to be able to draw upon even more compute power than some of the other more inexpensive versions of its model. What does that ultimately mean? More compute power means that you can get better answers. And what is some of that compute power going to? Parsing and processing. These are kinds of terms that, if you're not in a technical role, if you're not like an engineer, like a computer engineer, and you may not use terms like this very often, but in a basic sense, parsing, we're talking about taking the input that you're providing these chat tools, which are compiled of tokens, right? The different words that compile what you're talking about, you're asking it, are tokens. And these chat tools, they take that information, that input, and they break it down into its different pieces to try and better understand it so that it can understand, have a grasp of, what it is you're trying to ask, what it is you're trying to achieve. And we'll see that to become the capability for these AI chat tools, or just AI tools in general, to do that kind of processing and parsing, to understand intent and to figure out what actually needs to be done to be successful. It's going to become more and more important as AI agent tools come about. And finally, safety, bias and harmful outputs. These are terms that aren't quite as technical, but do have a technical underpinning to them. But they come up a fair amount because a lot of people out there, including myself, who are looking into AI tools and trying to understand them and seeing where the field and the industry is going, think about these things, because ultimately this starts to get to the human side. of how these AI tools impact what we do, how we use them, and impact our lives and society. On one side of it is bias. So like we talked about a few minutes ago, these AI tools are large language models. They are trained by essentially consuming and reviewing and understanding massive amounts of human language content. However, there's different models out there, and people are training new ones. The different types of models are growing on a daily basis as different companies and groups and teams are creating their own versions, and they're training those large language models on different types of content. So ultimately, the output of what that large language model is and how it's going to react to various types of input might be different based on the content that it was trained on. So, for example, if somebody created a large language model that never included any kind of historical information about a particular cultural or racial or ethnic group in the world, it is reasonable to assume that if somebody took that large language model and then posed it various questions, it might not have anything to say about those people because it was not trained on them. It has no concept of who those types of people were. And I use that as an example of like ethnic groups, cultural, racial, because that is kind of an example where bias really comes up and people are most concerned with. Because ultimately, if people are asking questions of these large language models, these AI systems, the hope is that the output they'll get back, the answers to the questions, will be historically and socially accurate. But again, if they weren't trained in a way to have a comprehensive data set, then there's reason to believe that perhaps the answers you get back in that kind of language model may not be comprehensive. So bias is an important safety aspect here. Another is harmful output. So while these AI tools are living in the cloud for the most part, they're on your phone, on your iPhone or Android phone, your web browser, something like that. We're not talking about physical harm, but rather harm from the language itself. The language could be very charged and biting and mean-spirited potentially, and offensive, and that's not something that most people really want to see. I mean, this isn't really delving into the idea of censorship and stuff like that, but rather, ensuring that people who might be sensitive or vulnerable to these types of tools, expecting them to be neutral, and then all of a sudden be bombarded with offensive language, that could be a very terrible experience. It's not something people want to see happen. So harmful outputs is an area that is really a big piece of what is safety. So there we go. There's kind of an overview of some of those key terms that for anybody who's kind of just getting into using these chat tools, these AI chat tools, to help you give a little bit more of a technical understanding of, what they're about, how they're doing what they're doing. And so when you read about them or hear about them in the news, you have a sense for what's going on. Well, thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.